At 75, Princess Anne, long known as the most private and duty-driven member of the royal family, has finally broken her silence on a secret that has lingered in whispers for decades. For years, rumors and speculations swirled behind palace walls, painting a shadowy picture of untold truths and hidden struggles. Now, Anne herself has confirmed what many dared not believe, a revelation powerful enough to shake the monarchy's image forever. But why did she wait until now? And what does this confession really mean? A confession that shook the crown. No one expected the moment to arrive, least of all in such a quiet setting. At 75, Princess Anne stood before an audience that thought they were about to witness another royal engagement filled with formality and polite applause. Instead, they were confronted with something entirely different, not ceremony, but confession. It was a rare and unfiltered glimpse into the private struggles of a woman long regarded as the monarchy's most steadfast figure. For decades, she had been called the hardest working royal, yet behind her composure lay a truth few imagined she would speak aloud. Her hands rested on the podium, papers neatly stacked, though she barely glanced at them. The silence before her first words stretched on, as if she were measuring the weight of the air. Then, softly, she began, "There is something I've carried in silence for far too long."
And let's face it, seniority in age or the passage of time.
The room froze. Those words suggested that what was coming would not be polished, not rehearsed, but deeply personal. For years, whispers about duty, marriage, and sacrifice circled the royal family, usually directed at others. But Anne turned the spotlight onto herself. She admitted that the same palace walls that taught her discipline had also forced her to suppress her own heart. She had given her life to the crown, but at what cost? "I believed that silence was strength," she confessed, "but silence can also be a prison. It shields you from scandal, yes, but it also buries truth so deep that it poisons what remains." The crowd gasped when she spoke of love, how it had so often been overshadowed by duty. While she never mentioned names, her words carried the unmistakable echo of a royal culture, where appearances ruled and personal happiness came second. It wasn't only about her own choices, but about a pattern that had defined generations of royals. Was her confession also a warning to the next in line, that tradition without compassion erodes more than it preserves? Her voice trembled most when she spoke of her late sister-in-law, Diana. Without directly saying it, Anne seemed to acknowledge the wounds Diana had carried, wounds never fully healed. "There is pain in honesty," Anne admitted, "but greater pain in pretending. And perhaps it is time we admit that the crown has not always been kind to those who carried it." The reaction was immediate. Some in the audience bowed their heads as if they couldn't bear the raw truth in her words. Others wiped away tears, not because the revelations were entirely new, but because they had never been voiced by a senior royal before. What had once been speculation was suddenly, undeniably, acknowledged. Anne's admission felt less like a prepared speech and more like the lifting of a burden. It was a reminder that even the most disciplined royal could not escape the human need for honesty.
I've underlined this year, perhaps, is the complexity of the challenges that you face.
Was this her attempt at closure, or her way of shaping how history would remember her, not only as the stoic Princess Royal, but as a woman who dared to speak truth in a family defined by silence? When she stepped away from the podium, the room remained still. The silence wasn't awkward, nor was it ceremonial. It was the silence of a nation realizing that behind the crown stood a woman who had carried regrets, burdens, and truths just like anyone else. And as whispers of succession continued to drift through the palace, one question lingered. If Princess Anne could finally break her silence, what other secrets still wait in the shadows of the monarchy? The monarchy thrives on ceremony, but its power often lies in what is left unsaid. Princess Anne's shocking confession that shook the monarchy. The confession spread faster than any royal announcement in living memory. Within hours, television screens across Britain looped Anne's words. "I never truly loved Diana." Newspapers splashed the line across front pages in bold ink. while talk shows buzzed with furious debate. Social media lit up with disbelief, sympathy, and anger. By morning, the country was in turmoil, and the monarchy was caught in a storm unlike anything it had faced for decades. The reaction was visceral. Outside Kensington Palace, mourners laid flowers and candles, not for Anne, but for Diana. It felt almost like 1997 all over again, as though Anne's words had torn open an old wound the nation had never fully healed. Commentators said her confession made Diana's memory shine brighter than ever. Her compassion, her smile, her resilience. Some even declared the people's princess had won once more, if only in spirit.
And the partnerships and the learning providers across England which helped to generate and promote.
What made Anne speak so openly now? Was it a moment of honesty, or a reckless remark that risked unraveling decades of carefully preserved royal dignity? Some voices praised her candor, calling it the bravest act of truth the monarchy had ever witnessed. Others saw it as a selfish outburst, reopening grief that had long scarred the public. Across the Atlantic, American broadcasters replayed Diana's most iconic moments: her walk through minefields, her visits to hospitals, her warmth with children. For them, Anne's admission simply confirmed what people had whispered all along. Diana had been trapped in a loveless arrangement. Behind palace walls, the silence was deafening. Buckingham Palace issued only a short, cautious statement, offering no explanation and no apology. Whispers of frantic meetings and midnight strategy sessions circulated as advisors struggled to contain the fury. But the absence of clarity only fed speculation. What were William and Harry thinking? Could they ever forgive hearing such words spoken so publicly about their mother? The brothers remained silent, yet sources hinted at deep pain. Memories of that haunting day in 1997, two young boys walking behind their mother's coffin.
There was this sea of flowers, so many people traveled to London.
Returned vividly to the public mind. Now those images were paired with Anne's confession, and the nation grieved all over again, this time for what her words might have done to Diana's sons. Meanwhile, Diana's friends and former staff spoke out. They recalled her struggles, her repeated claim that there were always 3 people in the marriage. Anne's confession seemed to validate her words. Interviews painted Diana not as a victim, but as a woman whose strength had been underestimated. Her legacy only grew, while Anne's image dimmed under the weight of her admission. Protests soon appeared outside palace gates, some carrying banners declaring, "Love is not duty." Others called for Anne to step aside, urging that only the next generation could restore public faith. And yet, there were softer voices too, those who wondered whether her honesty marked a turning point.
CHO Aachen 2023.
Could the monarchy survive only by speaking painful truths, no matter how damaging? Or had Anne gone too far, shattering trust that could never be repaired? One thing was certain. The uproar was not fading quickly. From London to Sydney, the world was asking whether duty to the crown had cost Diana her happiness. And as weeks turned into months, the conversation returned again and again to one unanswered question. Could Anne's family and the monarchy itself ever recover from a truth spoken too late? The echoes of Diana's sorrow and Anne's unspoken truth revealed just how fragile the monarchy's glittering facade can be. To understand what really lies beyond the golden pageantry, let's dive into the details of a world few ever glimpse. Anne and the hidden shadows behind the glitter. The glittering illusion of a royal fairy tale is what the world always sees first. It dazzles under the camera lights, wrapped in silks, diamonds, and golden carriages. But behind those shimmering walls, the truth is rarely so simple. Few know this better than Princess Anne, whose life inside the monarchy has often been painted as steady and unshakable. Yet, the more closely you look, the more you realize that duty and sacrifice have shaped her story as deeply as any crown ever could. Think back to July 1981. Nearly 750 million people watched as Diana Spencer married into the royal family, in a spectacle so breathtaking it seemed to suspend time itself. Streets were silent, televisions glowed across continents, and newspapers shouted, "Wedding of the Century." The young bride floated down the aisle of St. Paul's Cathedral in a gown that seemed endless.
Very few details of their love life weren't part of the growing spectacle. That was Charles and Diana.
Her smile fragile, yet luminous. To the world, it was perfection. But to Anne, who stood watching history unfold from within the gilded walls, it may have felt like something else entirely. Could she already sense the cracks forming beneath that carefully staged fairy tale? After all, Anne had lived long enough within palace corridors to know that not every dazzling smile tells the full story. For Diana, the cameras captured innocence stepping into grandeur. Yet within the family, whispers already suggested that the weight of the crown would be heavier than the dress itself. Anne, practical and blunt by nature, surely recognized that Diana was not only marrying a man, but entering into an institution older and colder than she could ever have imagined. The world saw romance.
That is extraordinary, because it requires such inspiration and innovation.
Anne may have seen the storm clouds. And that is the curious thing about Anne. She has always walked a different path. Unlike her brothers, she never sought the spotlight, nor did she play into fairy tale expectations. She knew from a young age that the crown's glow comes with shadows, scrutiny, loneliness, and a duty that consumes private dreams. How many times, one wonders, did she see others, like Diana, struggle beneath the same weight? And how often did she bite her tongue while cameras demanded smiles that never reached her eyes? What fascinates royal watchers is how Anne endured it differently. Where others leaned on fantasy, Anne leaned on grit. Where Diana was pushed into the role of a fragile princess,
I have a slightly different historical perspective. I'm struck this year.
Anne insisted on being a working royal, out in the fields, at horse events, or tackling hundreds of public duties with little fuss. Was this her quiet rebellion, to show the world that survival in the monarchy required practicality, not fairy dust? The fairy tale wedding of 1981, which millions believed to be a love story for the ages, became a cautionary tale of how appearances can deceive. And while Diana's tragedy unfolded for the world to see, Anne's presence in the background reminds us of the hidden complexity within royal life. She embodies a question that lingers even now. What does it truly cost to live under the crown? The world cheered that July morning, convinced they had witnessed magic. Yet inside the palace, Anne knew better. She had seen enough to understand that royal destinies are rarely written in golden diamonds. More often, they're carved in silence, sacrifice, and secrets. What shapes a royal more? Public adoration or private scars? Stay connected to uncover the answer. Anne's silent sacrifice. A young girl shaped not by choice, but by circumstance. Long before duty weighed heavily on her shoulders, Princess Anne carried the marks of a childhood that was anything but perfect. While the world would later see her as the unflinching workhorse of the monarchy, behind that armor of discipline was a woman whose early years taught her resilience, and perhaps hardened her heart in ways few could understand. Anne was never the fairy tale princess the public imagined Diana to be. Born into privilege, yes.
A distant relative of the Queen was executed after the 1917 revolution.
But her childhood bore cracks that shaped her forever. The separation of her parents, Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip, left shadows not easily erased. At a time when warmth and affection were the things she craved most, she often found herself instead surrounded by formality and expectation. Could it be that this early instability explains why even today she clings so fiercely to duty, as if structure itself were a refuge from chaos? Unlike Diana, Anne never played the part of the fragile ingenue. By the 1970s, she had already forged a reputation as headstrong.
I hope that means that the conference will have more debate, more...
Sharp-tongued and unapologetically direct. Yet beneath that steely surface was someone who wanted, at her core, the same thing Diana longed for: a home filled with genuine love. She adored horses, yes, but she also longed for something more ordinary, moments away from protocol, laughter around a kitchen table, a life not always dictated by the crown. But royal life rarely grants such freedoms. When Anne entered her first marriage to Captain Mark Phillips in 1973 at Westminster Abbey, the photographs suggested triumph, a glamorous princess embarking on a new chapter. Yet, whispers circulated even then. Was this truly a love match? Or was it another carefully arranged union designed to keep scandal at bay and satisfy the monarchy's obsession with appearances? Like Diana years later, Anne may have believed in love. But what she stepped into was an institution that demanded loyalty not just to a partner, but to the crown itself. What complicates Anne's story further is the constant shadow of comparison. While Diana was painted as the innocent bride caught in a gilded cage, Anne was cast as the no-nonsense princess who never flinched. But what if that toughness was her own mask, a shield against the same loneliness that consumed Diana? Behind the glare of tiaras and formal ceremonies, was Anne also caught in the same web of sacrifice, duty before desire, appearances before authenticity. Palace insiders often remarked how Anne, unlike her brothers, never seemed swayed by scandal. Yet speculation persists. Was this stoicism the result of strength, or simply a survival strategy? By never showing weakness, she avoided being devoured by the same media frenzy that destroyed Diana. Still, one cannot help but wonder if her silence has been its own kind of prison.
Chancellor, you will know that Her Majesty today becomes the 7th member.
Today, Anne is praised as the hardest-working royal, her calendar packed with engagements year after year. But behind that reputation lies an untold story of sacrifice. Did she choose this path freely, or was it chosen for her long before she had a say? The monarchy needed her to be reliable, unwavering, almost unbreakable, and she delivered. But at what personal cost? The fairy tales were never real. Anne's chapter reminds us of that. Beneath the glitter of state banquets and photo calls is a woman who, like Diana, once dreamed of love and laughter, only to find herself bound to an institution that demanded everything and gave very little in return. Fairy tales fade when the crown's weight settles in. From Anne's sacrifices to Diana's shattered dreams, the royal stage hides more than it reveals. The shattered illusion. The glitter of Diana's wedding day promised a fairy tale too perfect to ever be real. Millions across the world watched her glide down the aisle, imagining that joy, love, and security awaited her in the years ahead. Yet what unfolded beyond the palace gates was far different from the dream that captivated the public eye.
As I said, many end up on the streets as a last resort.
The princess who seemed destined for everlasting happiness found herself in a marriage shadowed by silence, longing, and a love that seemed always just beyond her reach. Those who expected warmth inside the palace walls might wonder, where did it all go wrong? The answer, perhaps, lies in the clash between personal desire and royal expectation. Anne, ever loyal to her duty and the weight of tradition, was said to have carried her own burdens, but the unspoken truth was impossible to ignore. Diana never felt fully cherished in the way she had hoped. Rumors whispered that emotional ties outside the marriage cast long shadows, leaving Diana vulnerable and alone, even when surrounded by grandeur. And the world noticed. To the press, Diana was not simply a princess, she was a living headline. Her every step, every gown, every fleeting expression treated as material to be dissected. Cameras flashed, magazines filled their pages, and broadcasters made fortunes out of her presence. Yet while she dazzled the public, behind closed doors, she often crumbled. The loneliness pressed heavily on her spirit, and with it came struggles too painful to conceal forever. Her battle with bulimia, her bouts of despair, and her aching search for understanding were rarely met with compassion inside the palace. Instead, she was viewed less as a young woman in pain and more as an indispensable symbol. Diana was expected to smile for photographs, hold the hands of strangers, and embody the warmth that kept the monarchy alive in the public imagination.
Everyone has the potential to give something back if only they had the chance.
If she faltered, it was considered an inconvenience. If she wept, it was concealed. The carefully staged images, hand-in-hand strolls through gardens, orchestrated family vacations, radiant smiles at the palace steps, painted a portrait of harmony. But reality told a harsher story. Nights of tears behind closed doors, unanswered cries for comfort, and the suffocating sense of being trapped in a gilded cage. And yet here lies the paradox that made Diana's story unforgettable. To the people, she became the people's princess, admired not only for her beauty, but for her humanity. Crowds adored her kindness, her warmth, her willingness to reach out where others stood apart. But inside the very institution she helped to revive, she was often just another piece in the machinery of monarchy, expected to keep moving no matter the personal cost. So we are left with the haunting contrast, the adored figure in the eyes of the world, but a woman who felt invisible where she most needed to be seen. Was she ever truly married to a person or to an institution that demanded more than anyone could give? And if that was the price of being royal, how did Diana endure both her duties as a wife and as a mother, balancing the role the world demanded with the private pain it never saw? Was it love or duty, disguised as devotion? Anne's silent battle beneath the crown. A battle of hearts and images, that is what it often felt like within the walls of the palace. To the public, those walls glittered with history, wealth, and grandeur. But for Anne, who had walked those corridors since childhood, the truth was far less enchanting. The duties, the ceremonies, the endless performances of loyalty to tradition. Sometimes they seemed less like honors and more like chains. Unlike others, she rarely sought sympathy. But silence does not mean absence of struggle. And behind that quiet exterior, storms often raged. There were moments when Anne must have wondered whether duty could ever allow space for peace. If happiness was not to be found inside those gilded halls, then perhaps it had to be created elsewhere. Many times she carried the weight of expectation without protest, yet her actions spoke louder than rehearsed words. She poured herself into causes that mattered, not because they enhanced her image, but because they reflected the steel and compassion that defined her character.
I hope you've all had a chance to see this cake, because it really is stunning.
While others hesitated in the face of controversy, she leaned into it. And unlike many royals, Anne never performed compassion for the cameras. It seemed to radiate naturally, even when she tried to downplay it. In this sense, she mirrored a truth the monarchy rarely embraced. Humanity is stronger than ceremony. Anne's bluntness, her unvarnished honesty, and her refusal to indulge in royal theatrics made her both respected and criticized. She was not the fairy tale princess, nor the carefully staged monarch. She was, instead, a woman who showed her scars and her strengths, a figure whose authenticity often made her more beloved than those positioned above her in the line of succession. But authenticity comes with consequences. Within the palace, whispers grew. She was too outspoken, too sharp, too unwilling to bend. What some saw as integrity, others framed as defiance. And in a family that thrived on order, hierarchy, and appearances, such defiance could feel like a threat. Some even speculated that Anne's voice sometimes outshone those who were meant to lead. Could it be that the institution feared her candor more than any scandal? After all, a voice unafraid of truth could unravel illusions centuries in the making. Her private battles, too, were never far from the public gaze. Like others in her family, Anne faced betrayals, rumors, and the ever-hungry press ready to feast on the cracks within royal marriages. While tabloids devoured tales of affairs and disputes, the public found themselves torn. Was this proof of royal fragility, or simply evidence that even princesses are human? And as history had already shown through Diana's words, a single truth spoken aloud can eclipse the might of palace statements. So perhaps the most intriguing question remains. In her own way, was Anne waging a quieter revolution?
Interestingly, if you like, I'm not here because this was my choice.
While others chased popularity, she seemed to reject performance, insisting instead on work, resilience, and grit. And maybe that is why she has endured while so many royal images have fractured under scrutiny. The crown may glitter for the cameras, but Anne's story reminds us that behind its shine live sacrifices, fractures, and a determination to carve identity even when tradition resists. And perhaps in her silence, she has been saying more than the monarchy ever intended. Royal lives often sparkle with diamonds and duty, yet beneath the surface lies a different story, one of sacrifice, silence, and humanity. Diana's humanity and Anne's quiet strength. Diana's story has never been a simple royal tale wrapped in diamonds and privilege. What continues to grip the world decades after her passing is not perfection, but humanity. She stumbled, she hurt, she revealed the very cracks that centuries of monarchy had always hidden. Behind her gowns and tiaras was a young woman daring to be authentic in a world that thrived on appearances. That honesty became her rebellion, and it changed the monarchy forever. She showed us that compassion could be powerful, not fragile. From shaking hands with AIDS patients during an era of fear to stepping across minefields in forgotten lands, Diana's actions carried a defiance more impactful than speeches. She was never simply a princess smiling from balconies. She was a figure who turned the lens of royalty toward those who were often ignored.
That eating disorders are merely an expression of female vanity.
Wasn't it this openness that allowed millions to feel they knew her, as though she belonged to them, as much as she belonged to palaces? Her legacy has not faded. It echoes through her sons. Princes William and Harry, in very different ways, still carry her flame. Their candor about grief and mental health, once taboo within the palace walls, reflects Diana's determination to bring humanity into royal life. The fact that today the monarchy speaks more openly about vulnerability and well-being is a ripple effect of her choices. What once was silence has become dialogue. What was once distant is now expected to feel more accessible. But is it really only Diana's sons who hold her legacy? Or does her influence stretch into the women of the monarchy who followed, each shaped by her courage in different ways? Consider the shifts in tone within the royal family, the willingness to appear imperfect, to allow emotion to show. Can we not trace those changes back to Diana's refusal to hide her own scars? The fairy tale that began in July 1981 with a wedding watched by over 750 million viewers was never the true story. The fascination that endures lies in what came after, the unraveling of illusion, the strength to remain real in a palace that seemed designed for masks. Diana proved that fairy tales may falter, but truth, empathy, and courage endure. And yet, in the present, another royal figure reflects a different kind of resilience. Princess Anne. Known for her unshakable devotion to duty, Anne has not sought Diana's path of emotional openness. Instead, she has carved her place with discipline, loyalty, and a refusal to court glamour. Some might say, Anne is the monarchy's steel while Diana was its heart. But doesn't a crown require both to survive? The warmth that connects and the backbone that sustains? So as we look back on Diana's humanity and forward to Anne's quiet strength, perhaps the question remains, which legacy truly shapes the monarchy today? The compassion that dared to break walls, or the resolve that keeps them standing? Stay tuned, because the answer may surprise us all. So, what do you think Anne's long-hidden secret means for the monarchy's future? Revelation or ruin? We'd like to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to share them in the comments and subscribe for more.